ISIS launching new attacks across Iraq, hitting Kurdish and Iraqi forces both in the north and in the west. They have now seized control of a part of a town near an airbase where U.S. Marines are training Iraqi forces. Also, according to U.S. officials, ISIS has now spread into Libya, Yemen, Egypt, Afghanistan, and Pakistan. That is a very major development. They say some Taliban members are rebranding themselves as ISIS in the hopes of attracting new terrorist recruits. And the Obama administration is pushing back hard against claims that they are not doing enough to save American hostages abroad, specifically in the case of Kayla Mueller, who you'll remember we learned this week was murdered by ISIS members. Texas Congressman Michael McCaul, chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, speaking to CNN about reports that the White House had intelligence on U.S. citizens being held by ISIS, but delayed acting on it.
I'm concerned they're not doing enough not only to save these hostages, but to win this war. All we're seeing is a policy of containment. This policy of containment is not a winning strategy. We need a policy to defeat and destroy ISIS once and for all.
Well, a national security spokesperson saying U.S. forces carry out operations as soon as the president and his team are confident that they can indeed be successful.
Hearing from Iraqi officials is that the entire town is now under the control of ISIS. It is yet another piece of land that they have grabbed, it would seem successfully, in a region where they have maintained considerable military momentum against the Iraqi army and local Sunni tribes. Concerning because it is so close to the Iraqi capital, but when it comes to this particular town, it is also just 10 miles from the Al-Assad airbase, which is where hundreds of U.S. military personnel are involved with training the Iraqi military, the Iraqi army. What we are now hearing is even more concerning this morning from Iraqi officials, and that is that not only have they taken the town of al-Baghdadi, but they are now moving towards the Al-Assad airbase. These are ISIS forces, and Iraqi officials say that ISIS has sent at least 8 suicide bombers in that direction towards the airbase. They say so far they have killed that number, 8. So it is clearly still very much a fluid situation, but one where that base is under, it would seem, some degree of threat. U.S. military has said that it has often consistently come under mortar and rocket fire. Nothing serious, nothing damaging. This could be very different. Chris, Alice.
We're beginning today with a very disturbing new report in the fight against ISIS. Reuters news service is reporting right now from Iraq that Islamic State fighters have taken over most of a city in the western part of the country. This is significant not only because ISIS has clearly made gains there, but specifically because this spot is near a key U.S. airbase where U.S. Marines are right now training Iraqi troops. Frankly, we're having a hard time getting details from the Pentagon. Officials there do confirm that there is heavy fighting in the area, but that's about it. The city in question is in Anbar province, where ISIS has been battling opposition forces for many months now. And today, according to Reuters, ISIS is winning in a spot that's fraught with peril for American troops. It's newly developing. Let's bring in the retired Army Colonel Thomas Lynch, who's with us. He's a former special assistant to the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman. He's now a fellow at the National Defense University. He's not here to speak on behalf of that university, by the way, or the Pentagon. This sounds very troublesome, sir. This spot that Reuters says ISIS has apparently overtaken, not far from a base where our soldiers are working.
Yeah, hi, Shep. Good to be with you again today. And yes, I think it's a report that bears watching, but I think it bears watching in context. And the context is this remains a fluid situation in Iraq. I think over the balance of the last couple, 3 weeks, reports that I've been tracking and seeing would suggest that ISIS has been put on its heels in many different places. Indeed, there's a report out 2 days ago about the number of airstrikes that have been launched against Iraqi forces that really have had a very debilitating effect on their vehicles, their sources of oil revenue, and several other locations. Having said that, they're still potent. And having been personally to that airbase, Al-Assad airbase, several times while I was still in uniform and working for senior leaders, I can tell you that it's probably about 10 to 15 miles, if I recall correctly, away from where this town is. So it's not in direct threat of what ISIS would have as indirect fire weapons, but it bears watching, and I'm sure there will be some response to that that'll be pretty significant in the next 24 to 48 hours.
We've seen the same reports you have, and it seems that you're on point there when you say that ISIS has been slowed or stopped in many areas, that much of what the coalition is doing seems to be working in recent days in ways that it hadn't, let's say, a month or two ago. That said, this situation specifically, this one location, seems to be significant. And if the Reuters reports are true, and we have no reason to doubt them, quite troublesome.
Well, again, I think it is worth watching. I think this has been an air base put in context, Shep, that, when you and I talked late last year, this was an air base at that time that was being identified as one that was, surrounded, if you would, by the Indian forces. So it bears watching. I would say, though, another thing to keep in mind is the capacity and the capability of Iraqi forces and as well as American forces to do response and evacuations, if it should come to that, has increased. And so is our ability to put targeted airstrikes on locations in that town that may be of conspicuous danger moving forward.
I just know that, I know because they've told us that they want to draw us into this fight. There's nothing ISIS wants more than American, quote, boots on the ground, unquote. And the thing when you read it that jumps to mind is, well, if they're heading toward the spot where our people are, the last thing we want to do is have them drawn in. Since it's the first thing ISIS wants, you just hope it doesn't come to that.
I would agree with you absolutely, Shep, and just in terms of tactics and how ISIS would draw us in at this point. I mean, it's one thing to take over a town that does not have defensive forces that are dug in place and battling you back. I think it's quite a significantly different thing to take on an air base like the one where we reportedly are working with Iraqis to train them, that you would have to get through some perimeter security and penetration. Now, again, it's not impossible. It bears watching very carefully. But again, if the ISIS forces are to mass to the number they would have to attack on the ground, and remember, they don't have air, they don't have many heavy weapons, that would make them conspicuously vulnerable to our airstrikes and attacks. And that's why I say, watch to see what happens from here. Because it's possible they could infiltrate from there and do some things, but I find it more than a little incredible that they would, in the near term, be able to mount a credible offensive capacity with the mass that wouldn't draw immediate airstrikes and difficulties for them on the ground.
That's great context and very valuable. Colonel Lynch, I appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Shep.